and we started recording.
Ready. Your greens just look so vibrant.
Thank you.
And I know it's because those are the fresh ones. They have to be.
Yes, they are. They're the ones I just picked, less than an hour ago.
Okay. Like mine, low compared to yours.
I'm just putting a note in the chat that we are recording live, everyone. So if you are we're recording and we're also streaming live on Facebook. So if you do not wish to be recorded or streamed, this will be available on our YouTube channel in about a week or so. But we do wish for you to stay with us, and we like to see your faces, only if you're comfortable though.
Yeah. They want everyone to feel comfortable. But it's cool for interaction. You know, if you guys would like to interact with us throughout the class, feel free to pop your cam on. And we're probably going to give people at least 5 minutes to start to trickle in so that we don't start without anybody. La, do you usually store your stuff in the mason jars?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like
I haven't done anything else besides that since the beginning.
Yeah, I'll keep it in a mason jar, and a couple years ago I hung herbs from my ceiling. So between those two, I like the aesthetic of having the herbs hanging from my ceiling. It makes me feel like that I'm really cooking and stuff in the kitchen.
So if anyone's listening, I used to, I had mine hanging from my ceiling as well. And like Latiana said, I like the aesthetic of it. But I went to actually like go use it like one time. It had like dust and dirt and cat hair. And I was like, yeah, I should have jarred these a while ago. But yeah, it looks really good. Hanging like
and with these gardens being so abundant, we could probably sacrifice a couple bundles for the aesthetic.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to give people about 1 more minute.
Okay.
They're still continuing to trickle in.
Ooh. Girl, I can't wait to put this valerian root back in the basement. I can smell it.
That smell.
You would think I bought up a bag of cat poop. Terrible.
Okay.
Okay. Now.
Yeah, we can start. I'm still letting people in, but we can start.
You said you still got to let more people in?
I let them in, so we can begin, and I'll just continue to let people in.
Okay, awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. Thank you for joining us. My name is Pamia. I'm one of the co-founders of Black Girls with Green Thumbs.
And hello, everyone. My name is Latiana, and welcome. We know that Saturday mornings could be prime time, so thank you for joining us.
Yes, absolutely. So if you guys are first time like viewers of our at home series, welcome. For any of you that are joining us for the second, third, fourth, or fifth time, welcome back to you. At home is the series that we've been doing for the past few months. Basically what we decided to do once the pandemic hit, we still wanted to make sure we could bring you guys important classes where you can learn more about how to grow your own food, how to prepare that food, and how to save it. So this class in particular, we're going to be diving into herb drying and different uses for those herbs. So having an herb garden, for me, it's not just a fad, so this is something that Latiana and I have always talked about with participants in all of our classes. So many people that join us might think like, well, I really don't have space. I don't have a backyard or I don't have a front yard. But having an herb garden is something that you can do even if you live in an apartment setting. So all you need to do at minimum is just have a few pots. And as long as you have light access in your apartment, windowsill on the inside or the outside, you can grow an herb garden that can benefit your family and, can actually save on food costs. And for me and my family, it's always something that we enjoy not only to grow and to use them fresh, but over the wintertime, we dry them and use them for many purposes, such as teas and tinctures and tonics and seasonings. So that's what we're going to be diving into today.
And herbs can be some of the easiest things that you choose to grow. For a lot of people who have been, I know during the pandemic, a lot of people have been interested in diving into gardening for the first time. And other than tomatoes, because everybody recommends tomatoes. Like if you're a first time gardener, grow some tomatoes because they're so plentiful and bountiful. But a secondary recommendation are herbs. Herbs are so easy to grow and dry. And as Tamia said, you don't need a lot of space to grow herbs. You can grow herbs in a kitchen window, or you can, grow a huge herb garden outside if you have that sort of space. So some of the easiest herbs to grow and dry, we have quite a few examples that Pamia and I will share with you today. We have both fresh and dry herbs. We manage and we built a garden at a library in our local area. So I went over there this morning. A few of the herbs actually have survived the cold snap. So I went over there this morning and picked some herbs. So some easy herbs to grow are basil. And I know Pamia has some holy basil that she can show.
Yes. Holy basil is actually one of my favorite species of basil. It has like this really sweet smell. And it lasts, I've noticed that it lasts frost a lot. It's a lot hardier than some of the other, like your purple basil, your red basil, or, your typical Italian basil. One of the other things I love about holy basil, it has this like ability it's on the verge of being scientifically quote unquote proven. But a lot of people believe this herb takes fluoride out of your water. So some people take this fresh herb after you wash it. You can put it in water overnight and tap water, that is, and it'll pull the fluoride out of it. Holy basil.
And that's a good point that Pamia brought up, like the hardiness of the herbs, because as she said, her holy basil really withstood the first frost, whereas I had some purple basil in my garden and some Italian basil, and when I went outside to look at it to think if I was going to pick it, it's like it disintegrated. So it didn't do well with that first frost. And another herb that's very easy to grow and dry is mint. So my mint came back. We've had such a mild fall in Pennsylvania. I don't know where you all are joining us from. I know that we get people from like all over the country, and we've gotten a few global guests, but the fall has been pretty mild. So my mint that died off maybe like September, October actually has grown back. So my mint is out there and it's doing well. Camilla has some mint that she can show.
Yes. So I had grown 2 different mint species this year. And I should take that back to say I grew them, because I actually planted these like 6 years ago and they've been coming back ever since, which is a beautiful thing within itself. So I've grown spearmint as well as peppermint. This is actually spearmint, and I know you guys can't smell it, but it smells absolutely amazing. It also survived that cold snap that we had. It's still growing really strong outside. Every year, honestly, usually until like December, I'll have access to these, even if they're still outside. In the past, I have brought them inside to try to extend their life. But I would kind of like warn against that because what I ended up doing was bringing some bugs into my house that weren't great for my other plants. So just a word of caution there. Make sure you're very careful when you're bringing herbs indoors, that have been outside for any period of time. Spearmint. This is the fresh spearmint. And I'll actually just show you really quickly what that spearmint looks like when it's dried. So if you can see these next to each other, they obviously look very different. All of the water content has been dried out from this one, and that's spearmint.
We have a comment. Instead of bringing the whole plant in, just take the cutting and wash all the bugs off, put in a glass of water, and it'll root.
Yes, that is another option. You can absolutely do that as well.
And the thing about mint is that, as Tamia said, like we both have mint that has continued to grow back year after year. So it's really not necessary to bring in like the entire plant. Like if you get the urge, like I don't want it to die, but it'll come back as soon as the weather permits and as soon as it's ready, it will come back.
Yes.
Another herb that is easy to grow and that we like to have in our garden or in our outdoor space is citronella, because it helps to deter some pests. Do you have citronella, Pamia?
I do. I have citronella. I grew it last year and I grew it this year again, both times from seed. It did not come back. So my citronella the reason that I grew my citronella was because I have like this mosquito issue, right? And so we all know citronella candles and the citronella torches are really good at keeping mosquitoes away. So I wanted to try my hand at just having it all around like my front yard area so that I can enjoy that outdoor space and not have to worry about being bitten. But what I will tell you from personal experience is that I don't feel like that citronella was a deterrent for any of the mosquitoes. I don't know if they're more aggressive now than they used to be. But after reading up on it and a few books that I had, what I found out was what you can do is make different, like we were talking about, like salves and things like that. You can use that fresh herb to, either create your own candles or create your own bundles to be burned, sort of similar to like a smudging sage stick or something of that nature. So the citronella works really well for that. I actually still have it outside. I can go grab it if you want to see it real quick. All right.
Pamia's gonna go grab a citronella so you can see it. Y'all are discussing in the chat, so that it's perfect. So yeah, a lot of these herbs that aren't as woody, the woody herbs aren't as easy to like propagate, but the ones that have more soft stems, like a basil, like a mint, you can propagate those in water and they'll grow. So like if you buy some well, they don't have roots, but yeah, if someone else is growing some basil or mint and you want to cultivate a plant at your house, if you have the stem, you can propagate that in water.
So hopefully you guys can see, this is one of my citronella plants that I had hanging outside in my porch area. So it did really well. I actually never repotted it or anything like that. And as you can see, you know, we're well into November, and it's still doing really well. The scent is amazing. It's like intoxicating right now, but this is that visual for the citronella. As you guys can see, you can always spot citronella because it has a very distinct leaf shape that not many other, you know, common herbs are going to be able to mimic. So it's really easy to smell it, to identify it right off the bat. But, you know, that leaf shape is a telltale sign of the citronella as well.
Yes, and another herb that is easy to grow, and I'll even say, I mean, if y'all are on social media, you know that it has grown in popularity. So we're going to give sage its time to shine. So sage is one of those that is very popular to grow and easy to dry. So I actually picked some sage about an hour ago from our garden. So here's some fresh sage. And I also have some dry sage that has been drying for about like a week or so. So we can see the difference. So you can see the leaves are less bright and they're less full.
One thing that I love about sage is that texture of the leaf, which is also like a major identifier. So when you touch it, it feels very soft and kind of like fuzzy in your hands. Obviously, when it's fresh, when it's dried, it's gonna, you know, change that texture and composition.
Yeah, and this sage is an example of another plant that is rather hardy because it was still thriving out there in the garden after that cold snap.
Yeah. I've had sage last the entire winter before.
Me
Granted,
too.
mild winters, you know, these past couple winters, they haven't been really bad at all, but I've had sage survive snow and everything else. So
Yeah, the sage that's on my porch, it's been out there for years at this point, like never fully dying. It'll like ebb and flow. Like it doesn't, it's a different species of sage than this. Like the leaves aren't as broad, but it survived.
right.
So I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, yeah, you got more sage info. My bad.
No, I was just gonna move on to another herb.
Okay. So next up on our list of easy to grow and dry herbs, we have oregano. So I just wanted to visually show you guys my oregano that I have from my windowsill. This is still growing really well. I have this rogue lemon balm growing in here also with it. I don't know where that came from. But I got some lemon balm growing in there with my oregano as well. So this is some fresh, beautiful oregano here. And I will show you all. I picked some this past Sunday. So that was about 6 days ago to dry in my drying rack. And this is the product of that. So you can see it still kind of looks the same. You can tell that it's still oregano, even though it's fully dried. But you can also tell that the stalk and the stems start to kind of like crinkle up, and you know, like as the water comes out of the plant, is gonna take the shape away a little bit. So that's oregano for you guys.
And I have some oregano that's pretty old. And I just wanted to show you the difference between her freshly and newly dried oregano and my oregano that's been drying for, I want to say years, because it's been just hanging from my ceiling. Because like we said, if you missed that part, like it feels good for us to have herbs hanging from the ceiling. It's like part of our kitchen aesthetic. So this is some old oregano that I just wanted to share with you all.
And so as you guys can see, like some herbs that have been dried for like longer periods of time, the longer that a herb has been dried, it starts to lose more of that color. And that's that chlorophyll, you know? So it's a good thing in the beginning, but you know, herbs have a shelf life as well. So as we talk about the herbs that we use for decoration and things like that, usually those wouldn't be herbs that we're going to use, you know, like for a tea or to, you know, consume, just because at that point they start to lose all their medicinal properties after they've been dried for a certain amount of time.
And they also lose the flavor. Like this, they lose the flavor, the scent. Like this oregano, it's really nothing but for show.
Right. Exactly.
Another herb that is easy to grow and dry is lavender. So I picked this lavender maybe about a week or two ago from our garden in at the library, and it still smells amazing. And I would actually compare it to, like, it's not lavender, because lavender and rosemary look very similar. So I'll show you, I'll tear off some rosemary. So their leaves look very similar, but I would compare lavender, the leaves, like, to be like as fuzzy as sage. So it helps you. So the rosemary leaves are like a little more waxy, and the lavender leaves are a little more fuzzy, and the green is more vibrant in a rosemary. And we can hop on over into rosemary. Rosemary, that's another hardy herb, and it is doing really well at the library. And I've had rosemary growing out in front of my house that hasn't died for a long time as well, Camilla.
You always did well with the rosemary.
Yes. So this is some freshly picked rosemary, and this rosemary has been drying for about a week. So as we described, the water content basically comes out when you are drying your herbs. So fresh rosemary, dried rosemary.
One thing I wanted to point out about the rosemary and about the lavender as well, because they're so similar, they come from the same family. One thing I've noticed with drying those is that they start to change color like very drastically, like when they're dry. So some of the other herbs that we're talking about just start to change a little bit. They become lighter and lighter and lighter, but it's kind of the opposite with the rosemary. It actually starts to get a lot darker. Like, I don't know, this is something that I've been drying, a piece of rosemary I've been drying for a little over a week. And you can see that some of this plant is not fully dry. So you can still see there's a lot of green there, but the parts that are dry, they start to turn very dark, almost like a purplish hue. And that's how you know that that plant is fully dry, when all of those pieces are kind of dark like that. So as you guys experiment, with this and start to, kind of see how different herbs dry and what they look like and how they change, you'll start to know what to look for, so you can spot any, any differences that may be troubling or things that you need to, remove from your pantry.
Okay, do I have any? Oh, I have thyme.
Yes.
So I also have some thyme, and that's a very easy to grow herb. It does its own thing. It can come back every year. And this is freshly picked from the garden. Do you have dry thyme, Camilla?
Yes. So this is the oddest thing, right? So thyme is one of those herbs that the actual leaf is very, very tiny, right? So usually these are going to dry a lot faster than, like your larger leafed herbs, or your woody stem herbs are going to take a lot longer to dry. But for some reason, I don't know if it's been the humidity. I do have a humidifier in my living room that I've been running, where these have been drying. They haven't dried the way I expected. So that's something to consider, depending on where you guys are as well. If you live in a very humid climate versus a very dry climate, you might have to alter your times or your methods for drying your herbs based on the air quality where you live.
Yes, and dry thyme makes it so easy to cook with, because although the leaves are very small, once they dry, and you can just remove the leaves so easily. So the kind of thyme that we grew at the garden, we did German thyme. Do you know what kind that you have, Camilla?
It's also German. It's from that same batch.
Oh, okay. Well, it did very, very well this summer.
It did. And one of the cool things that I love about thyme, like Latiana mentioned, it's really easy to remove it from its stem, especially when it's dry, but also when it's fresh. What I usually teach people in our cooking classes is that if you hold a stem of thyme upright, just like the same fashion that it grows in, literally all you have to do is take your hand and pull it down, and all of those leaves will be in your hand. If they're dried, again, it comes off even easier. But even when it's fresh, it's very easy to remove the leaves from a twig of thyme.
So one of the last herbs that I'm going to share that we are really excited about, because we have been like dibbling and growing, and I visited a farm. So we have some hemp. And I wouldn't say that hemp is very easy to grow, but if you do venture into growing some hemp, it definitely is easy just to air dry. So this is a piece of hemp that has both the flower and the leaves on there. And I'm gonna show you a couple pieces. And I have some leaves that I can show you as well that dried.
Beautiful.
If you notice, the hemp is in a mason jar. That's how we typically store our dry herbs to help maintain their vitality. So here are some leaves.
Wonderful. So one thing that I did want to mention about storing your herbs like after they dry, like Latiana just mentioned that she has hers in a mason jar. And typically I store all my dry herbs once they're fully finished drying in mason jars as well. I usually put them like in my pantry closet. And the reason for that is a lot of times store them in areas where there's a lot of light, you know, and also your ability to have your herbs last a long time. That really start to break down the herbs a lot quicker than they would naturally. So that dark pantry is a really good spot for them. With that being said, you do have to consider that you want to make sure that your herbs are fully dried when you do that. As you can imagine, if your herbs aren't all the way dried and you store them in a mason jar in a dark area, what do you think is going to happen? Mold's going to grow on the inside, right? Like the perfect setup to have mold grow on your herbs. And that's definitely something from a health standpoint that you want to keep under control. You don't want to be consuming anything that can hurt you or make you ill. So that's definitely something I want you guys to think about when you are home drying your own herbs.
And we have a question about freezing rosemary. Have you ever frozen rosemary?
I have not frozen rosemary on its own. We will dive back into that because there are ways later on in the lesson to have herbs be frozen, but there's a particular way that you can do it outside of just placing them in the freezer, and we'll get to that in a second. So we went herb drying. Okay, cool. So
yeah. So we went through some different herbs and showing you visually what they look like, both fresh and dry. So now we're going to dive into different methods to dry your herbs. So to dry your herbs properly, you need 3 key ingredients. And you've been hearing us talk about it, but I want to be very explicit. You need airflow, shade, and time. So the best way to dry your herbs are to give them the time that they need. There are a lot of different ways that you can really expedite the drying of the herbs, but the best way to keep all their medicinal qualities and their flavors and scents is to really give it some time. And it's important to keep the plants out of the sun and keep them protected from getting sprinkled by, as Samia said, like cat fur or dust and pollen, any particulates that might fall on them. The general guidance for harvesting herbs is you just like with any other produce, you want to wash them first, even if it's just a rinse. You want to rinse off any dirt or anything that may have been on the herbs prior to you picking them and before you dry them.
Yes, I found out that that's really important when it comes to bugs because I'm a person that moves very, very quickly. So if I see something that I want to do, I just do it, and I don't always like do every single step that you need to do. And I learned my lesson with that, because one thing that's really disgusting is being at your breakfast table in the morning and saying, you know, I'm going to have a nice cup of peppermint tea this morning. And you put your peppermint tea in your tea ball and it's floating around, and then there's some bugs in there. That's gross. And that comes from, you know, not following the steps. You want to make sure you're washing your herbs really well in cool water prior to drying them. You'd be surprised to jump on your herbs, indoors or outdoors.
Yes. And we're going to move on now into demonstrating some different methods into drying some herbs. So Pamia is going to show you a few different ways.
Okay, so the first way I'm going to show you guys is my preferred method. This is 99.9% how I dry my herbs. What I have here is an herb drying rack. So this is one of the larger herb drying racks. I can Can you guys see it? Share back.
Yes, we can see it.
So this one has 5 different levels. I really like this one because it has different areas to separate different herbs. It's dark, so not as much light comes through it, but it has all these little tiny holes for very good airflow. And I just love it. You can hang this up pretty much anywhere in your home that doesn't get full sunlight. Again, you want to be careful of having the sun dry out your herbs. And I do know that can be tempting because obviously the sun is a natural source of heat, and it will dry the herbs out, but not in a manner that will retain their nutritional value and their taste. So what you would do to use this, I'll just demonstrate using that spearmint that I showed you guys before. So we're going to pretend that this has been washed off very well and it's been dried on a napkin. And what we would do is take, you don't have to destem them or anything. You're just going to take them, place them on your rack on the inside, and let them dry out from anywhere from like 10, 12 to 14 days. Usually that will be enough for most herbs, but each herb is going to be on its own time frame when it comes to drying. And again, remember that the temperature in your house, especially in the wintertime, sometimes I have space heaters going or different things like humidifiers or what have you. So just be considerate of the temperature in your house and the humidity in your house when you are expecting for the herbs to be dried. But I like these racks because they're very cheap. If I'm not mistaken, I got this on Amazon a really long time ago. I know it was under 20 bucks. It might've been like $15.99 or something like that. And they last forever. They're very easy to clean, very easy to store. And that is like considered to be like a basket screen herb drying rack. That is my preferred method.
Yeah, and if you have like any more traditional baskets, like the woven baskets or a screen, like a mesh screen, those are other ways that are very similar, falls within that same line of what Camilla just shared with you, putting herbs on a material that allows for airflow in a single layer.
Yes. So another way you can dry your herbs, and actually when I first started drying herbs, this was the first way that I tried, and this is called bundling. So I'm going to show you guys that holy basil that I showed you in the beginning of class. This is a really good example of an herb that you can bundle. So usually when I'm bundling herbs, I'm going to choose herbs like hemp, like Latiana showed us, or something that has like really long stalks. And what you're actually going to be doing, again, we're remembering to wash and dry these off with a paper towel. And what I do is I take a pipe cleaner, and what I would do is I would wrap my pipe cleaner around the bottom part of the stem to bundle them. And when I do that, I'm making sure that I'm not over bundling. So what over bundling would mean was that I'm taking a whole bunch of plant material and putting it together. And you want to avoid that because you still want to make sure that there's airflow flowing in between your leaves and your branch material so that they can dry properly. As you can imagine, if I had like double or triple this, it would just be too much and it wouldn't dry properly. You would have everything on the outside dry while the inside could be molding or, breaking down in a way we wouldn't want that to happen. And as I have this last part of my pipe cleaner, what I used to do is I would attach this to a hanger inside a closet that I'm not using in my home. And I just go ahead and shut that closet door and let these hang and dry in a dry, dark space. And it can kind of cut down on the time that you have to dry when you do it that way. And, you want to check on them every couple of days, make sure it's, air flowing in there. And it's a really good way to dry your herbs. Not my personal favorite. It looks great. Like Latiana, I don't know if she showed you guys in the beginning. A lot of people do this for aesthetic reasons in your kitchen or in your pantry, or just to have quick access to your herbs. But it looks really good and it works. So that's the bundling technique.
And I've also bundled using pipe cleaners. That's a good idea. I've used twine. So I've hung the twine from my ceiling in the kitchen and then bundled using twine to connect it and then somehow connected it to the twine that I hung from the ceiling.
Nice. about me and Latiana is we like to repurpose a lot of things. So if we don't have to buy something, like if you guys don't want to spend the money on buying a drying rack or anything like that, you absolutely don't have to. We're always trying to encourage people to use, methods that we've used culturally, historically and culturally to dry herbs, and bundling is definitely one of those.
Yes, and another method that is a time sensitive and a more, I would say, like natural method to dry herbs would be the brown bag method. So, you might have a brown bag from any supermarket or bought some small lunch bags from the store, and you would essentially do the same thing that Camilla shared with the screen and basket method. So, open the bag, and again, we're going to pretend that these herbs are washed and dried and, free of bugs and dirt. And you're going to arrange the herbs on a single layer inside of the paper bag as well. So I have some rosemary that I'm putting in there. I'll put some thyme. So just on a single layer, and the bag will protect it from dust and pollen and cat fur and other things. And this will allow for some airflow as well. So you don't necessarily want it to go totally flat, but allow for some air to go into the bag.
Yes, we'll be reiterating throughout this lesson that the airflow is very important in any method that you choose. And again, as you're drying your herbs, especially if you're a first timer, one of the things you want to make sure you're looking out for is any like discoloration. Like if you see something turning black or white, that's a clear indication that mold might be an issue in your drying process.
Yes, and I think you said you had, because I actually had tossed some herbs recently that had that showed that they were black or white. Do you have something that you can show that might have some mold in it?
I don't. Thankfully, I haven't had that issue recently. Just making sure that I'm properly drying and storing. But it's definitely something that I'm always looking out for. If you've ever had food poisoning or if you've ever been sick from something that you've eaten, you know how horrendous that is and you know how sick it can make you. So again, everything that we're discussing now and the techniques that we're teaching, the ultimate goal is for everyone to be healthier and be more self-sufficient. So in the spirit of that, we want to make sure that we're doing things in the proper way, so that we don't make ourselves sick or anyone that we love.
So I just want to reiterate that whatever method that you choose to use to dry the herbs, you want to make sure that the plants are dried completely and that you can't detect any moisture, because that will help to protect from the herbs growing any mold or anything that could make you sick. Then after the herbs are dry, from there you can destem the leaves or the flowers that if you haven't already, and store the plant materials in glass jars. And you've heard us say several times that we store it in glass jars because it really helps to protect the herbs and really keep their keep their vitality. And you've done a good job if the dry plants hold the color and the scent of the fresh plants.
Yeah.
There was something that I wanted to say. Oh, when you showed I think that was the holy basil that you bundled. I just wanted you to talk a little more about the stems and the flowers. And
oh yes, absolutely. So one indicator when you guys are harvesting or picking your herbs, in terms of when you should do it, is technically it's right before an herb flowers. So as you guys can see with this holy basil, it's been flowered for a while, right? So this was something that, I could have picked a while ago, but I let it keep growing. And the reason for that is usually that's when plants are at their height of, taste and nutritional value. So that's when you want to go ahead and harvest them for drying. So one of the things that you can do if you've harvested some herbs that already have like all of these flowers and seeds on them, I kind of do like a double whammy when it comes to utilizing them. So as I'm drying these herbs, I can actually also use this time and take the opportunity to remove some of the seeds. So it can be a seed saving activity as well as an herb drying activity if you guys are harvesting when you have your flowers in your plant.
Yeah, and we spoke a little bit about like trying to preserve the herbs and bring them in, but if you save the seeds, then now you have seeds where you can grow for the next season, and you can start growing plants like herbs as early as February or March to get yourself ready for your spring garden indoors, depending on your climate. And if you dry your herb, once they're dried and you store them in glass jars, they'll typically last up to about a year or so into in the glass jars. And you can use your senses. So like once the color fades or the scent fades, then you know that the herbs are losing either their medicinal potency or their vitality and their flavor.
Yes. One thing I wanted to point out as well is that everything that we've shown you guys so far, for the most part, has been leaf-based drying for our herbs. But herbs, just like, any other plant, have different parts. So you have your leaves, you have your flowers, you have your stem, you have your roots, and many different herbs can be different parts of those herbs can be harvested. So one of those things are the root, like I just spoke of. I wanted to talk to you guys about a specific herb called valerian that I have some root of. If any of you guys are familiar with valerian, you know that it has a scent. It really has. Valerian I've used just like as a calming herb. Some people say that it has like sedative qualities. People use it to try to sleep better or to try to calm themselves if you have like any kind of anxiety issues. And I can attest that it works really well. If you notice, I am pulling my valerian out of multiple plastic bags. I have tried to store this herb in glass. I've tried to store it in many different methods. And it's so potent when it comes to its scent that, you can always smell this herb. So I actually keep it in my basement because it smells horrible. So I just wanted to let you all know and kind of show you what it looks like. The valerian is kind of like a woody, stemmy root, as you guys can see. If you guys are attempting to collect any roots of any herb to store for medicinal properties, it's worth mentioning that you want to make sure that you cut them up and chop them into the pieces, the size pieces you want them to be in, because if you wait until after you dried them, it's going to be almost impossible. It's going to be very difficult to cut them and break them down. And you don't want to risk, cutting yourself or hurting yourself trying to, exude too much force. So I will always suggest doing that in the very beginning before you dry them, so you don't even have to worry about that later. And again, with different herbs, you can harvest different parts of those herbs. So I have another visual here for you guys today of a tea that I made. And this is a tea that actually has all plant parts in it. So it has leaf, it has flower, it has stem, and it has roots of some herbs that are very high in iron. I used to have iron issues. So this is like my iron boosting tea.
Before we move too far, I have a question. There's a question about how do you use the valerian root? Like, so you have the roots dried. So what method do you use it?
So me personally, I use it in tea form. Again, it's a personal preference with the valerian, because no matter how you take it, you're going to have that odor, and it doesn't necessarily taste good either. So this is a herb that is specifically, it's not for, oh, it's so beautiful, or, it smells so good. It doesn't. It's for its medicinal qualities. So if I'm feeling anxious, or if I feel like I just want to relax, just like some people have a cup of chamomile tea in the evening, you might use valerian for those same purposes. But again, it does have kind of like a sedative quality to it. So it might make you a little bit sleepy. I have purchased it in the past in tincture form. And basically what that means, tinctures can be made in a couple different ways, usually with alcohol. The alcohol will extract, the essence of that herb. And usually that's stored in a small glass jar with a dropper. You can put that into some juice. You can put it underneath your tongue. There's different ways to consume valerian. One thing I will say about valerian in tincture form is it almost tastes like you're taking a shot. That alcohol and that valerian mixture, it's really hard. It's almost just like, taking a shot of vodka. It's rough. Yeah. So
yeah, and I just wanted to show you all an example of an herb in a tincture form. And we're going to talk about different forms of herbs in a couple of minutes. But since we were talking about tinctures, so it's in a dropper. And I actually have some valerian root upstairs. And as Tamia said, it doesn't taste good. I typically will put a couple of drops in some water and take a shot. Right. Get it over and done with.
My son in the past, just to calm him down sometimes in tea form, and I would have to put a lot of honey with it, especially if you're using it, like for a child. It's a rough one. Yeah.
And we did mention one common mistake to avoid when drying herbs. And Camilla mentioned making bundles too thick because it doesn't allow for airflow. And I saw that there was a question about using a hair dryer. So one mistake to avoid when drying herbs is you don't want your plants to be too crispy. And electric dehydrators or something like a hair dryer could make your plants too crispy. So it's very easy to overpower the herbs. As we mentioned, some plants like basil, they're very delicate. And with that heat and that air, even on a low setting, it can make them too crunchy. It can remove too much moisture. Unless you live somewhere where it's very humid that makes air drying difficult, you should try to air dry. It'll help to really maintain the quality of the herb. And that's what we want, because as this lesson is called, like we want to preserve our herb garden. We want to preserve these herbs in ways that will continue to benefit, whether you're using it for medicinal, so benefit your health, or benefit you in the kitchen if you're using it for culinary purposes. But if you do use a dehydrator or you do use some other sort of electric method, do it on the lowest setting possible. So that way that you can really manage the process. So you can catch it before it gets too crispy, and you want to watch it. If they lose their color, if they get too toasty, then they've lost too much of their vitality, and you might not want to use it. You're not going to get the same boost that you would.
Yes, absolutely. For me, like a rule of thumb in life and in drying herbs is just, take your time sometimes. So like when we want something we live in a society where everything just has to be instant, like all the time, right? But what I found out was that a lot of things that you get instantly pretty much aren't as good for you as things that take their time. We can make analogies when it comes to, getting something from a fast food restaurant versus cooking it yourself with the nutritional quality. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to herbs. Like I said, I love, the drying method with the rack because it's very easy. You place it in there and it's going to dry. They're all laid out separately. So, you're not going to have that issue of overcrowding. But if you guys just must, dry overnight, I've tried to do it before. I've done it in my oven. My oven goes down to, I believe, 170. And you can use that setting for a couple hours. Most people's ovens don't go under 200 for the most part. And I've seen people do it that way also. But again, it doesn't maintain the integrity of some of these more delicate leaves like basil, like Latiana mentioned. Sometimes if you use a dehydrator on one of those and you go to grab the herb, it will literally disintegrate in your hands, because you rush the process. So if you guys want to take my advice, I would say, the longer it takes to dry out, the better. And that way you won't be running into these problems with mold and things like that.
As you were talking about analogies, it just made me think. So my partner, he's a barbecue guy, and in barbecue it's always low and slow. So that's what we want to do with herbs. We want the temperature to be low. We want the humidity to be low. And we just want to take our time. So I just wanted to be mindful of the time, Camilla. We have just about 10 minutes left. We do have some other information that we wanted to share with you, but I think it's really important that we go over some general uses for dry herbs. And I want you to demonstrate our culinary seasoning.
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to using dried herbs, there's a couple different things that you can use them for. So today we're going to be making a quick Italian seasoning. It seems like simple enough, but I think it's a really good talking point if you have people over and it's like, oh, this dish I made that seasoning. I grew those herbs. I dried those herbs, and this seasoning is mine. So seasoning is one of those things you can use to, if you have an overabundance of herbs in your garden, or it's just something you're into, you can make a seasoning. We've already talked about teas. Those are also very easy. You're literally just taking those dry herbs. I personally like to use tea kettles that have like the catcher inside, or you can use tea balls for your dried herbs. You can also find on the internet, your own tea bags as well, if you want to make bags on your own. All of this stuff is very easy and simple to do. Outside of the seasonings and the teas, you can also make a tonic. So I have an example of a tonic that I have made. You can see it's pretty dark in color. This is a rooted tonic. So it's made from herbs like elderberry. There's actually, you know what? I can show you guys. I made this tonic, like I said, from elderberry. I actually was able to get some Cascara Sagrada from a local health food store. I used Cascara Sagrada in there. Again, this tonic was specifically, I made it keeping in mind that I've had iron issues now and in the past. So these are all herbs that are very high in iron and magnesium. Basically what you would do is you would take a pot on your stove, and you can take those herbs that are dried already. You can place them in the pot. You can boil the water and make sure you put a lid on top and let them sit for maybe an hour or so. After that, I would drain it, and then you're left with a tonic that may look something similar to this, depending on the herbs that you're using. I specifically like tonics because they tend to last for a while in the refrigerator, about a month, sometimes even up to 2 months, depending on what herb it is that you're using. And if you've strained, the actual like leaves and sticks and stems out of it. So what you guys will notice with this is it's all liquid. So I strained this one really, really well. It doesn't have any plant material in it, but it does have the essence of the plants in this tonic. After tonics, tincture is something else that we can make. So Latiana, can you show the visual for the tincture again that you have? I've experimented with making tinctures in the past. I haven't necessarily been that great at them. So there's a couple different methods. Some people use dried herbs, some people use fresh. Fresh herbs can be used when it comes to making tinctures. Many times people are placing these herbs in alcohol. Alcohol is a very good extractor when it comes to the essence of plant materials, and that can be strained again. One other thing that you can do is place fresh or dry herbs into a base oil. It could be like a coconut oil or an olive oil, or maybe even like a grapeseed oil. Which is higher quality. And over time, as you store those, the essence of those herbs will come out into that oil. I would suggest against using fresh herbs for that method, again, because you have that predisposition to grow mold and things of that nature if it isn't watched properly. But tinctures can be made in that form and fashion as well.
So I have 2 different tinctures. I actually hosted a healing event a few weeks ago in Philly, so I had gotten these tinctures. And this one in particular, they made this one with cane alcohol and apple cider vinegar. And it is a blend of motherwort, skullcap, lemon balm, and chamomile. And it's supposed to help with your daytime anxiety. So as we said, the tinctures, they are typically in jars like this, and they have a dropper. And this is a passion flower one. And as you can see, like this one's pretty light. So it has a different color than the tonic that Camilla shared.
So really quickly, I know we don't have a whole lot of time. The last thing that I wanted to bring up, because I know someone asked earlier about freezing rosemary specifically. And one thing that I've seen people do, and this works really, really well, is making your own like frozen cubes of oil and herbs. That you can use for, making quick dinners for your family. And what you could do in that sense is get an ice tray You can fill that ice tray with some olive oil. And I've done it before with like some crushed garlic and some dried basil and some oregano. And it kind of makes these frozen cubes of oil and herbs that you can just pop into a pan and then add your vegetables or your meat or your fish or whatever it is that you're making. And you can cut down on food costs and, you know, kind of save your herbs and over time. It works really well and it's very delicious. So I don't know what you want to call them. I just call them frozen cubes of oil and herbs.
I call them exactly all the ingredients that are inside.
For them, because I've actually seen them in Trader Joe's. I think it was like $8.99 or something for this pack. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's really expensive. I can do that, you know, for a fraction of the cost at home. So that's just another way you can use your dried herbs for culinary purposes.
So as Camilla gathers her ingredients to demonstrate really quickly how to make an Italian season, I'll go over some other uses for dried herbs. So we mentioned tea, we mentioned culinary seasonings. You can also do herb infusions for tonics, perfumes, colognes. You can even make dryer sheets. So you would fill an old pillowcase with some dried lavender, toss it in the dryer with your clothes for a non-toxic, refreshing scent. You can make bath soaks. You can make sea salts. You can even do infused body oils. I've actually used some herbs with some shea butter. So like made some body butter with some herbs, and of course, depending on the herb, and you can smoke dry herbs such as mullein leaf, mugwort. We have some hemp over here. You can you can smudge. You can burn some herbs like sage. So there are so many different uses for dried herbs and fresh herbs.
Yes. So moving on, hopefully someone had a question. Let me just see real quick. Do you like or grow coriander? I think you might call it cilantro. Yes, absolutely. So for me, I love cilantro because I'm a Mexican food connoisseur. Like me and my son, we love Mexican food. So we use cilantro a lot. I actually made some pico de gallo last night with some of the leftover cilantro I had from my outdoor garden this summer. So coriander, if you guys don't know, is like the seed. Well, in America anyway, we call coriander that seed portion from that plant. But you're saying that in the UK, you guys just call it coriander as a whole? I think I missed that. Is that what it's? Okay, yeah. So that's interesting. Yeah. So here in America, just the seed itself is used in different recipes, either crushed, sometimes for the flavor. But a lot of people just say, cilantro for the fresh herb and then coriander for the dried seed portion.
I'm glad she brought that up. I just dug into my my spice cabinet, so sorry if anybody saw like all leg, but I have some coriander from years ago from cilantro that I grew, and it's been stored in the back of my cabinet.
Nice. Yes, that's so funny. So I'll show you guys quickly, since we only have a few minutes, just how to make your own home seasoning. So one thing you want to make sure you start out with is a method to store it. Like Latiana and I said, we use mason jars for pretty much everything when it comes to storing our that we made. So I have my mason jar here. I'm gonna go ahead and pop that open. This has been cleaned out already. Same thing with all of my herbs here. So as you guys can see, I'm gonna start out with my oregano here. This has been dried really well. And you don't want to get any stalks, if you can help it, into your seasonings, because those are going to be things that as you use them in recipes or people are eating them, that they're going to be picking out of their teeth, and that's not very appetizing, right? So we want to keep those out of our recipe. So as you guys can see, when an herb is very dry, it comes off very easily from the stalk. You don't have to put in a whole lot of work. You can literally just pull that stem out and you'll have your herbs there. So I had a bunch of oregano here. And again, as herbs dry, they tend to look smaller because they don't have that water content in them anymore. I have to tell you guys, this oregano, it smells so amazing. So I have my oregano here. I have destemmed it. We're grabbing all of the leaves off of that. And this recipe actually calls for 2 teaspoons of dried oregano. And you can kind of use your judgment as to how much you need to take off as you're de-stemming them. And I'm hoping you guys can see, yes. So right here,
Yes.
look to have about 2 teaspoons of oregano there, not tablespoons, again, teaspoons. I'll put in a little bit more just for good measure.
We
And
like oregano. Oregano is good.
it's awesome. And you also want to be conscious again. We've rinsed these off with cool water just to make sure we don't have any like foreign debris or any bugs in it. But as you're pulling, you can always make sure you're looking and doing a double check there. So I have my oregano. Next up, I'm going to grab some of my dried rosemary. Now, again, going back to how rosemary should look, it's going to be a little bit darker when we're talking about the dried form of rosemary. And as you guys can see, I'm kind of just pulling these very long leaves off of this very woody stem. Again, smells amazing. Smells very, very good. Gonna pull all of these off. And I have enough rosemary for about 1 tablespoon of dry rosemary. So we're gonna take a little bit away. This recipe calls for 1 teaspoon. Next up, I'm going to be using my dried basil. So just like Latiana said, remember, basil is one of those herbs that is not as hardy for the most part. And as it dries, it's going to be very, very delicate. So you can handle it, with caution, with care, because you want to make sure that it's not going to be dust as you're putting it into your recipe. You still want those leaves to remain as whole as possible. And we're going to do 2 tablespoons of our dried basil. So I'm gonna grab another leaf of dried basil here. Put that in. And again, you guys see how easily the stuff is coming off the stems. Very, very easy. Next up, we're going to do our thyme. Now, remember, thyme was one of those herbs that has those very, very small leaves on it. So as we hold them upright, we can just drag our hands across the bottom of them. And sometimes those stems will pop off. So I'm going to go back in and take those larger stems off. We only want leaves for an Italian seasoning recipe, no stems whatsoever. And again, we're looking to do about 2 tablespoons of that. This smells so good. My hands, I'm not going to want to wash my hands. Great. We're going to do a little bit more just for good measure. And the last thing that goes into this recipe is actually dried sage, which I don't have any of, but that's okay because not all Italian seasonings have sage in them. And if you guys want to omit anything, not just sage, for personal preference reasons or for, health reasons, whatever it is, you can do that. So as you guys can see, I kind of have my bunch of all of those herbs there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my knife and we're going to go through and just do a double check and pull out any extra stems that we see, especially when it comes to like the rosemary and thyme, because those stems are very, very woody and we don't want to be chewing on those. Okay, it looks like we're good to go here. So I'm just going to take my knife and just like I would be chopping up fresh herbs, I'm just going to go in and chop these into smaller portions. And why would we like chop this up? Why wouldn't we just like gather all of this and just place it into a jar? The reason for that is because we have all different size leaves here, right? So we want to make sure that it's kind of consistent and, the different leaves all being chopped down to the same size so that when we mix this seasoning up in our jar, everything gets incorporated really well. So when we go to use it, whether we use a shaker or whether we use a spoon, it's kind of like consistent. We don't want a spoonful of just rosemary or a spoonful of just thyme and basil. We want everything to, get incorporated really well into our recipe. This smells so good.
I was thinking about in particular with the cutting of the herbs that the rosemary like really calls for it because those leaves are so vastly different than the other herbs that you included in this recipe.
They're very thin, as you can see, like this one, and they definitely need to be chopped. Because rosemary, again, is one of those herbs that when you're doing a recipe, you don't want to just like bite into a long stem of rosemary. You want that chopped up really well. So I'm hoping you guys can see from where you are what this is starting to look like. It's starting to look like an Italian seasoning that you would buy from the store. And this is just a really simple way, again, to utilize your herbs so that when you're, you're entertaining guests or, just for you and your own family, I think it's a boasting point. I like being able to say that, what I'm cooking with is something that I grew, dried, and, I participated in every step of this. So this is just a little bit, but as you guys can see, we just successfully dried and made our own Italian seasoning. Pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you, Famia, for demonstrating that. So we are at the end of our class, and we tend to ask people at the end, show us your faces. If you made the seasoning with Famia, show us your final product. Say hello and goodbye to us. Typically, what I would do at the end of the class is tell you about our funders, and I can mention who our funders are, but I'm actually going to send you all an email since we're very short on time. But this program is supported through a grant from the National Network of Libraries of Medicine Mid-Atlantic region and their partnership with a research program called All of Us. So I will send you an email with those details if you want to learn more about this precision medicine medical research program. And we're also really excited because Black Girls with Green Thumbs, we have launched our first fundraising campaign for Giving Tuesday. So that will be included in the email. If you gained any knowledge from this, if you support us in any way, we accept all donations of any size, like anything that you have to offer in the form of a monetary donation, we are grateful for, and it will help us continue to offer programs like this. And when things change or things get warm, we're also going to be able to get back into the gardens, into our school and community gardens. So any support all around will help us continue to bring programs to you internationally and locally to children and families in our region.
Yes. So if you guys have any questions or any comments, or again, like Latiana said, if you just want to say hi, feel free to take yourself off of mute or take yourself off of so that we can see your faces. One thing I wanted to mention to you guys is when you make your own Italian seasoning, this will typically last for up to 6 months. So, some people like what they like to do with these mason jars. They have a little section here where you can take a Sharpie and write a date on it. So that works. So you don't have to guess when you made it if you don't remember.
Yes, I made pickles a few years ago with an overabundance of cucumbers. If you've ever grown cucumbers, you always have more than you need. So I made some pickles and I wrote on the top, like, okay, this is what I put in them. This is the year. Mason jars are so handy. And before we got into the lesson, Penny and I were having a conversation about our tendency to like upcycle glass jars. So for the seasonings, like an upcycle baby food jar, or I had an artichoke jar around here at some point. Like those are really good for that. But just repurpose it. You need some sort of storage. The mason jars that have not had the sealed, like with a canning method, like those would be to use for long term, like pickling, or like if you make sauces that you need to have a shelf life. So it doesn't look like we have any questions or everybody shy today. That's fine, because we thank you for joining us and staying along with us. So you can expect an email from us with information about our funders, and that email is also going to include a survey/evaluation. Is very short, just a few questions. So if you can answer that will help us continue to be in good favor of our funders. So we really ask that you do that. And we're going to let you go. Oh, visit our website. We have merchandise that also supports our programming. So we have different colored t-shirts. We have some hats, notebooks, We also just released aprons because we've been cooking a lot more lately. So whether it's for you or gifts for the holidays, feel free to take a gander in our online shop. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next month. We offer this every month, so hopefully we'll see you next month.
Yes, thanks so much, guys. Enjoy. If you guys decide to make that recipe and you want to post it on Instagram or Facebook, be sure to tag us so we can check out and see what you guys did.
Have a good weekend.
Have a great one. Thanks for joining us.